Hi everyone, welcome to my channel. For those of you who are new here, my family and I love all things paranormal, and we have traveled to some of the most haunted spots in the country. I wanted to tell you about a trip that my husband and I took a couple months ago. We went down to Southern California and we had the chance to visit the Whaley House in Old Town San Diego. Now, a little history on the Whaley House. Construction on it began in 1856 and it was finished in 1857. Throughout the time that the Whaleys lived there, it also served as a courthouse, San Diego's first commercial theater, and a general store, among many other things, though its primary purpose was as the home of the Whaley family. Thomas Whaley, who built the home, was born in New York City in 1823, and then he moved out to California with the gold rush in 1849. He first settled in San Francisco, where he set up a store on Montgomery Street. Unfortunately, in May of 1851, he lost that store to a fire. So after that, he set out for Old Town San Diego on the advice of his friend and colleague, Lewis Franklin. I believe they went into business together for a time in San Diego. Now, Thomas always was clear that his intention of going out to California was to build up a business and to save some money so that he could return to New York and marry his sweetheart, Anna Eloise Delaunay. And he did just that. On August 14th of 1853, the couple was married. And they stayed in New York for a bit before returning to San Diego in 1854. Thomas Whaley decided he wanted to build a home for his family and purchased property that was once the site of a public execution, one that Thomas himself may have attended. In 1852, Yankee Jim, whose real name was James Robinson, was arrested and tried for stealing a boat. He was found guilty, and the punishment for stealing something of $50 or more in value at that time was death. So he was sentenced to hang. Unfortunately, they miscalculated the length of rope that they needed, and instead of being a quick hanging, Yankee Jim was actually slowly strangled to death over the course of 45 minutes. It is said that the archway between the music room and the parlor of the Whaley House is the exact spot in which Yankee Jim was hanged. He is also believed to be the ghost responsible for the heavy footsteps that have been heard in the house since the Whaleys lived there. Anna Whaley herself heard heavy footsteps on the stairs and at times felt a dark shadow following her around, and the family seemed to contribute these things to Yankee Jim. Not long after the Whaleys moved into their new home, one of their children, Thomas Whaley Jr., sadly passed away from scarlet fever in January of 1858. He was only about 17 or 18 months old at the time of his death. Several months later, in August of 1858, Thomas lost another business to fire. With these two tragedies happening so close together, Thomas decided to move his family from San Diego to San Francisco. In 1868, the Whaley family returned to their San Diego home, and Thomas began extensive renovations on it. It soon became the headquarters for the San Diego County Courthouse. He rented out an upstairs room to be used as a theater, and he also rebuilt the home in a way to house a general store. But by 1870, merchants began leaving Old Town for the newly established New Town San Diego. It seemed that Old Town was kind of dying out while New Town was the place to be. There were some tensions between people who wanted to keep the courthouse in Old Town and those who wished it to move it to a more central location in New Town. It seems that New Town won that dispute, and in 1871 it's reported that while Thomas was away for business, an armed group of men came to the Whaley House and removed the courthouse documents. In January of 1882, the Whaley daughters Violet and Anna were both married right around the same time. Violet was married to George Bertolacci. I'm really sorry if I butchered that last name, but it's rumored that he left her shortly after their marriage and possibly during their extended honeymoon. There's some reports that say that he only married her for her family's money, and once he realized he wasn't going to be able to get his hands on that, he just kind of dropped her and left. Violet actually divorced him, which was kind of unheard of in those days, and she took her maiden name back and moved back with her family. I had read that Violet's youngest sister was engaged during this time, and the man that she was engaged to broke off their wedding because of the shame he felt Violet brought to the family by divorcing her husband. After all of this, Violet sank into a deep depression, and in August of 1885, Violet, who was 22 at the time, took her own life by shooting herself in the heart with her father's pistol. Thomas heard the gunshot and rushed out to the outhouse only to find Violet slumped over with a gunshot wound to her chest. He carried her into the home and the doctor was sent for. However, she died before the doctor even arrived. I found a newspaper article from the time detailing Violet's death, and it stated that she had recently returned from a trip to Warner's Ranch and some other places where she'd been taken for her health. Now, I'm not from Southern California, and I'm completely unfamiliar with Warner's Ranch, so I thought I'd do a little bit of research on it. The ranch itself has some fascinating history, so if you're interested, go ahead and look that up. I believe you can still visit the ranch today. I think it's between San Diego and Temecula. But back in the day in 1885, it seems that in addition to being a working ranch with like sheep and cattle and horses, it was also the site of hot springs, which were thought to be good for all types of ailments. In the newspaper article, it was stating what types of minerals were in the water and that for a fee, you could bathe in the water to try to alleviate some of these ailments. So it seems that the Whaley family probably sent Violet there in an attempt to help her out of her depression, but unfortunately, as we know, the attempts were unsuccessful. Not long after Violet's death, Thomas Whaley built a home and moved his family to Newtown, San Diego, possibly to leave their heartbreak behind, and maybe a little bit because Newtown was the up-and-coming place to be. Thomas passed in the house in 1890, and then Anna passed away in 1913. As for the ghosts in the Whaley house, it seems like several of the original occupants are still there. Thomas has been seen on the second floor dressed in a black coat and wearing a hat. And Anna has been seen on the main floor in the parlor music room area wearing a green gingham dress. There's also ghostly figures that look out of the windows of the home. Sometimes people say it's Thomas. Sometimes people say it looks like Anna. Just could be that both of them are just keeping an eye on everything. Visitors report hearing the small footsteps and giggles of a toddler, leaving them wondering if little Thomas Jr. is still playing in the house. Violet has been seen on the second floor as well, and it's said that she leaves cold spots in the house and also brings with her this intense feeling of sadness and sorrow. There's even a dog and cat that have been seen chasing each other throughout the rooms. In addition to seeing and hearing the original occupants of the home, there are also phantom scents that sometimes waft through the home, such as that of baking bread or baking pies. Piano music can still be heard on occasion, and even the sound of dishes and silverware clanking and rattling together. In addition to the Whaley House, there's another interesting spot to visit in Old Town, and that's the El Campo Santo Cemetery, and it's just down the road from the Whaley House. Now, I did not take any photos of the cemetery. I don't know why. I always take photos of every place, but somehow I don't know, I missed it. But this cemetery was established in 1849, and it was the first pioneer cemetery in San Diego. The cemetery was only in use until around 1880. Then, in 1889, a horse-drawn streetcar line was built through part of the cemetery. They did relocate some of the graves when they were constructing the streetcar line. However, they didn't move all of them. I don't know if they didn't know these graves were there or if they just didn't care, but several were still left behind. Over time, the cemetery was neglected and just kind of fell into ruin. In 1933, however, attempts were made to restore the cemetery using old maps and photos and descriptions of the time. Then in 1942, the streetcar line was actually paved over, as were the graves that had been left behind. Now, in 1993, ground-penetrating radar was brought in, and they actually located several graves beneath the street and the sidewalk in front of the cemetery. They placed these little circle markers on each of the grave sites to kind of identify where they are, and you can still see them. We noticed several of them on the sidewalk in front of the cemetery. I don't know if there are any in the street. It was too busy for me to go wandering around in the street looking for them. But it's kind of sad because, there's people buried there, and we have no idea who they are or what their lives were or what their names were. So the cemetery is also thought to be haunted, as is the street and the sidewalk in front of the cemetery. There's a lot of poltergeist-like activity that's reported in this area. Lights go on and off, appliances turn on and off by themselves. Car alarms seem to like to go off in this area. Also on the street in front, if you're parked, sometimes your car won't start or your car will break down in front of the cemetery. Now, inside the cemetery, there are also reports of orbs, shadow figures moving moving throughout the cemetery. There's a lady in white that seems to walk amongst the graves. And this is also the cemetery where Yankee Jim was buried after he was hanged. There's also reports of people seeing him wandering through the cemetery. So I guess if he's not at the Whaley House, he might be down at the El Campo Santo Cemetery. With all of the tragedy that happened at the Whaley House, it's not surprising that this is one of the most haunted houses in the country. Have you ever been to the Whaley House? Let me know in the comments below. Until next time, stay spooky, my friends.